Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. The Outdoor Adventure Series celebrates individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, access, and enjoyment of the outdoors. In this episode, we continue to celebrate the National Marine Sanctuary's 50th year of ocean conservation and stewardship. Our guest today is Dr. Leila Hatch. Leila is a research ecologist at the NOAA Office of National Marine Sanctuaries Science and Heritage Division. She coordinates NOAA's efforts to monitor underwater sound across the sanctuary system and apply that information to protect these special places and to make them better. Leila, it is a pleasure to have you on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast, and so glad you're willing to kind of step in, lean in to participate in this podcast and part of this 50th year of celebrating the National Marine Sanctuaries.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Fantastic. Now, what I love to do with any guest for that matter, but really I'm finding it incredibly fascinating to hear about everybody's path to how they first got into their profession and eventually made their way to the National Marine Sanctuaries. And it just would love if you could give us a kind of a 30,000 foot view of who is Dr. Leila Hatch.
Absolutely. They are fun paths. And mine is kind of born of parents who are really interested in social activism and who were also very interested in music. And really, actually, the apple then doesn't fall very far from those two trees. But I grew up in upstate New York near Cornell University. And when I was growing up, the university was starting a place called the Bioacoustics Research Program within the Laboratory of Ornithology. And my father, who was a musicologist and studied the role of music in people's lives around the world, was really involved in some of the hiring they were doing to start that place. And the new director moved in next door. And we lived in a very rural environment where I had been very, very close to nature. And my mom was really interested in legal protections for people in the family court system. So she was really engaged in civil rights and activism and representing people who were underrepresented in systems. And those things really were kind of guiding to, as that place got started up and started to think about how to use the sounds that they were recording underwater, as well as the sounds they were recording from birds, to better protect animals. And I got really interested in that through high school. And then I went away to college, and in college was really interested in, well, still singing and music, because they are still really important to me and to things I love, but also to studying biology and thinking about how we can use information in sciences for protection. And I did my work there on whales and became really interested in genetics. And then after that, I worked in different places around the world where field work was needed for big projects about how people affect the environment, from Australia to Madagascar to different projects off Hawaii. And often the theme was understanding how animals were responding to something we were doing, figuring out how we could observe those changes when they occurred, and then helping policymakers make decisions. And by the end of my degree at Cornell, where I worked on questions about how to manage large whale species all around the world, and got to go to the International Whaling Commission's meetings where different countries thought about those questions and things like that, I was really sure that I really wanted to work in that policy landscape and continue to work on kind of technical advising. And I applied to the John A. Knaus Marine Policy Fellowship Program and was placed in as a legislative fellow in the House of Representatives for the Resources Committee. It was a really intense year. Maybe they all are actually in Congress, but this particular one passed the Energy Policy Act of 2005, which is actually a big deal right now, even for guiding offshore wind development, renewables development. So it was a really big shift in energy policy. And we were reauthorizing the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation Act. We were reauthorizing the Marine Mammal Protection Act. There was a lot of legislative work going on. And I got really interested in that. And at the end, wanted to move to Boston to be with my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and started to look at ways of working in the executive branch in that same space. And that drew me to working with Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary, which is off the coast of Massachusetts, because from the minute I set foot in the door to get to meet with the research lead in Stellwagen, I could see that this was a place where science and decision making, for good and not for good and for evil, but for for all the good and bad reasons, they were really being done by people working very closely together. It was a small team of people who really had to do that integration. So if you could do it, I call it a very short feedback loop. But there was no desire to keep the science over here and all the decisions over here, right? There was a constant need to do the science and bring it directly into what you might not need to know next to make a better protective decision. And I loved that space. And I've been with the Sanctuary program ever since.